Earlier, you could have you could have a star-driven film that could have a really weak story, but because there's a star and because there's spectacle of a certain sort involved, you can get away with it. Now what we're seeing is that audiences are saying, boss, that's not enough. You need to give us a new world, a new story that is really kind of well thought out. And that kind of has brought writers back to like a position of primacy almost. I think the charm of Rocky Randhawa is that he's a man in progress, right? He's work in progress. He's not the finished item. That he's ready to change. He wants to become a better person. He wants to sort of understand the rules by how this works for the sake of love. And I think that is what really sort of made Rocky Randhawa connect to so many people. So just know that you will hear more no's than yes, but don't let that destroy you or your work.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of What's Brown Got to Do With It. So today, my guest is no stranger to the big screen, known for some of his amazing work with films you definitely would have heard of. He has been a screenwriter for Indian films and TV shows, as well as a filmmaker in his own right. He wrote one of my favorite films to date and also won awards for it. So I would love to welcome Sumit Roy to the podcast today. Hi, Sumit. How are you?
I am good and such a pleasure to be on your podcast.
I'm so excited because, like I mentioned, you have actually written one of my most favorite films in a really, really long time. So much so that I have watched it so many times. So without the suspense is like probably killing people. Sumit, you wrote Rocky Aur Rani ki Prem Kahani, and I'm sure the majority of people have watched the movie at least once. I know so many people that watched it like a few times, including me. I think I told you this before. One of my favorite experiences with Rocky Aur Rani was I took a bunch of my friends who are not South Asian. And so when I said to you, I told you, so it was myself, it was one of my Emirati friends, a Fijian friend, Canadian friend, a South African friend, and an Indian friend. And we all went to watch it, and there were tears and there was laughter. And there was a debrief, which actually lasted longer than the film itself. But we'll talk more about Rocky Aur Rani. What I really kind of want to start with is, the journey of storytelling, because storytelling has always been a powerful tool for cultural and social change. So I would love to know about your journey into, storytelling and your opinions on like, how does cinema shape society today? And what role does script writing play in that process?
Yeah. So I think anyone who's known me since I was a kid would not be surprised that I'm a writer today, because I think I developed writerly instincts from a very young age. I was kind of staging storytelling sessions for my family. I tried to write like a novel at the age of 10. I got to, I think, like 300 pages before I abandoned it. I was editor of the school magazine, so I was always sort of dabbling with stories. But cinema came later to me. I, of course, grew up watching a lot of cinema, being from a Bengali household where there is a premium put on high culture in a sense. You ended up watching like a lot of art films as well as like the standard staple of like Bollywood commercial potboilers that everyone kind of grows up on. After doing a bachelor's in history, I was kind of at a crossroad in my life, trying to figure out what I want to do next in my life. And the idea of sort of studying film seemed really exciting at that point of time. So I went to this university called Jamia to get a master's in mass communication, where I had sort of kind of entered thinking that I'm going to come out of this becoming some kind of a film theorist or a film critic maybe. But while I was there, I sort of started engaging with filmmaking itself. And I discovered like this whole other part of till that point, I never sort of thought that filmmaking was actually like a potential career for me, but that sort of the 2.5 years I spent in Jamia changed that for me. And I came out of it feeling like this is maybe what I really want to do. And this is maybe something that I might have some talent for. After I came out of Jamia, I dabbled with a bunch of things. I made some corporate films, made some documentaries. And then I made a short film that kind of went big, traveled all over the world. And then I figured that maybe I have a talent for fiction. And that sort of motivated me to move to Bombay. And, the rest, as they say, is history. And one thing led to the other. I think the interesting thing about cinema as an art form is that in some senses, when it started out, it was closer to the carnival than anything else, right? I mean, when the first cinema shows were being sort of put up, they were sort of these wonders of this new technology. This was like an invitation to audiences to watch spectacle unfold, right? Because cinema can sort of make visual experiences come true, which are not possible in other art forms. And I think when you look at commercial cinema, that sort of lure of the spectacle or still sort of exists in a certain way, which is why even today, when sort of people go to the cinema hall, they want to be sort of dazzled by cinema in a certain way. You watch television because you want to relate. You go to the cinema halls at some basic level because you want to see a kind of imagery that you can't see anywhere else. And that sometimes what happens, I think, in cinema is that sometimes kind of takes over the artistic side of cinema in many, many film industries across the world. Even in Bollywood, I think you can have a kind of masala cinema where, because also India is a culture where sort of heroes are really important. It's a star-driven culture. So you can have cinemas that are sort of built around the stars, where sort of audiences are going to receive their favorite stars in a certain way. So they want to watch how these stars romance on screen, how stars fight on screen, how stars crack a joke on screen. So it's very sort of star centric, and sometimes in that kind of preoccupation with the star system and the spectacle, storytelling and writing is not necessarily the most important thing. And I think that kind of cinema kind of continues to exist. And in Hindi cinema, that kind of cinema, we've had phases in Hindi cinema where that kind of cinema dominated, and that was the only kind of thing that was getting made. I think what has happened interestingly over the last few years is that because of the streaming boom, audiences in India are watching content from all over the world. So now suddenly like the appetite of audiences has changed. Earlier you could have you could have a star driven film that could have a really weak story, but because there's a star and because there's spectacle of a certain sort involved, you can get away with it. Now what we are seeing is that audiences are saying, boss, that's not enough. You need to give us a new world, a new story that is really kind of well thought out. And that kind of has brought writers back to like a position of primacy almost. Writers from being like the people in the creative process who were often seen as the most disposable have in some senses become the most important. So it's kind of like an interesting kind of circle that we're seeing sort of coming around. And I feel that writers like me and people who are working in the industry right now are very lucky to be working in it at a time when this immense creative churn is happening, which is sort of opening the space for great storytelling on the theatrical screen and also in sort of streaming.
Yeah. I mean, it's true because writers didn't get the recognition. And I remember, and I just watched it again with my dad, watching the documentary Angry Young Man about Salim Javed, and where it really highlights the struggles and the evolution of writers in Indian cinema. I mean, I'm assuming you've watched it. How did that kind of resonate with you? And what other challenges do you think that brings to light?
I haven't watched the documentary, but I know the stories. I know their legend, and I think the Salim Javed were rock stars, right? They were rock stars because they kind of realized that if you don't get what you want politely, you just have to kind of knock the door down, right? And it's that force of personality that kind of allowed them to do what they did. And I think one of the interesting things that I've realized about the filmmaking process as I've sort of spent more years in this industry is that it's like always a space for creative. There's always a tussle of ideas, right? And you always need to be able to play on the front foot in a certain way, and you need to be able to sort of be very emphatic about what you want, and sort of be ready to break the door down or walk away from something, because otherwise you kind of get you kind of get eaten up in the creative process. And not necessarily because someone's always out to get you, but because what it takes to make a film is for several highly opinionated people to come together and sort of express their opinions in a very strong fashion, but still sort of manage to agree on stuff. So if you're always feeling as a writer that you can't express yourself, or that you're sort of in some senses you need to do what someone else is telling you, you're going to have trouble kind of making it in the business. And I think what Salim Javed said that did was that they kind of changed the power equation. That's what sort of writers need to keep doing. They need to kind of find people who sort of recognize their craft, and they need to be sort of more demanding about getting people to respect their craft. And I think that this stuff is happening because at some level, this is demand and supply. Now, and one of the things I always say, for instance, is that in the theatrical experience, when masala films were doing really well, you could get away with bad writing. You could get away with showing something in slow motion. You could get away with like having like 3 hit songs that makes your film work. If you're going to make like, let's say, a show for streaming, right? You can't do slow motion shot taking. You can't put in songs. That's not going to make your show work. If you do not have a script that's well written, that's kind of holding together, the whole thing falls apart. So television in that sense, series in that sense, all around the world, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's Bollywood, is a writer-driven medium. And now we have we have the right economic conditions for the writers to do well in that sense. And I think I think we're seeing a lot of progress in the way writers are treated. And when I speak to sort of writers who were working in the industry like 15, 20 years back, they tell me the same thing. They tell me your generation is lucky because you don't know what we went through, and life is so much easier for you guys. And I think we're blessed in that sense.
You know, one of my favorite bits from the Angry Young Man documentary was they said that Salim Javed said that one of the films, and I cannot remember for the life of me which one. I'm going to say Diwar, but maybe I'm wrong. That they actually, when it was released and all the posters were put out, you know, it had Amitabh Bachchan on there and everything, and I can't remember who the director was, but they actually paid someone to go and write Salim Javed on every single poster that was out there. And, you know, people were like, well, that was unheard of. Like, nobody cared in those days who wrote the film. But the fact that they put value on themselves, and they will, you know, put the value that we are the writers of this and this story cannot be made without us, was just mind-blowing. And that it's taking so long now to get that recognition, that now people are asking, like, actually, who did write this? You know, before, as a viewer, probably wouldn't have been interested in who actually wrote this. But you touched upon this, and we talk about like OTT and different streaming services, but also the power of just social media now. So, you know, back in the day and there was this whole controversy around like Sholay even, and how that was taken from this film and that film, but nobody would have known. The audience wouldn't know because they had never had access to those films. But now with social media, you have access. I mean, if you use even a beat of a song from somewhere else, someone's coming in and saying, you know, you've stolen my song. And so, kind of parallel, what are some of the biggest challenges that you think that script writers face in the industry today, especially like in the changing landscape of OTT platforms and streaming services, and the fact that, you know, you can't just take a storyline from another film now and then plot it in this one, which, to be fair, you know, Bollywood was kind of renowned for before, like making the worst.
I think if the internet had been around like 30 years back, a lot of the great films of Indian cinema would not have been made, and a lot of the great songs would not have been created, because we know that there was a certain culture within the industry. I think when it comes to, I love that story about Salim Javed painting their sort of names on the poster. I think it's been sort of like a aspirational story for a lot of writers I know. Thankfully, things are a little better now. I remember sort of telling myself at a certain point of time that I want to write films which, after you watch the film, you will ask yourself who wrote that film, because there was something remarkable about the writing. Of course, the writer's name used to kind of get hidden somewhere or not appear at all in the poster or in publicity for the longest time. But a lot of that is thankfully changing. I remember, so the first film I wrote for Karan Johar, which is a film which has not been shot yet, was a film called Takht. It's this big Mughal drama about Aurangzeb and Tarashiko. And I wrote the film for him, and he sort of really liked the script. He told me that it was the first time someone else had written the entire script for his for one of his films, because before that he had either sort of partially or completely written all the films he had made. But he loved it. He loved the script that I wrote so much that when the first sort of publicity announcement for the film came out, the first poster that got released was just his name, like Karan Johar's new film, and my name and the name of the dialogue writer of the film. And this happened at a time when we already had most of the cast. So he could have he could have put like Ranveer's name, Vicky's name, Bhumi's name, Karina's name. But he said the experience of making this film has been so driven by this script that has been written for me by Sumit and by Hussein, who did the dialogues with me, that I want to sort of give them the recognition that when the first sort of announcement comes out, I want the spotlight to be on them. And this was a big moment for writers in the industry. I didn't know he was going to do this. I kind of found out on Twitter when he kind of did it. And suddenly everyone was asking, who is Sumit Roy, who has written this, like, who has written Karan Johar's next script? And I think because he did it, and when someone as senior and as respected as Karan does it, then suddenly it became almost mandatory for everyone else to kind of give their writers a similar kind of respect. And this is how things change. Someone does it, and because everyone respects that and they think that this is the right thing to do, everyone kind of starts doing it again as well. And now I think we've reached a stage where it's not like you don't have films announced where the writer's name is missing. But if that happens, then there are people on Twitter who will go and ask the director or ask the producer, why isn't the writer's name on this poster? So we've moved from a time where it was almost sort of where it was a fait accompli that the writer's name would not be on the poster, to people actually asking, why is the writer's name not on the poster, right? So that is a big kind of transition that has happened in the feature film space over the last 5 years or so. And in what has happened in the streaming space is because, like I said, that in the streaming, in the business of series and television, the writer dominates everywhere. Writers have graduated to becoming creators, showrunners. So they get sort of a place of prominence, which otherwise they would not have been getting. So you kind of, these days, when sort of when people love a show, they know who's written the show. They're looking out for what else that writer is writing, and they sort of follow the oeuvre of that person. We're still sort of an infancy in this thing, because it's a it's a relatively new thing. But I think we are moving in the direction that Hollywood has, where you have writers and showrunners who have their kind of own fan clubs, right? You know what the guy who wrote Succession, Jesse Armstrong, is working on after this, or you would be looking forward to seeing what he did after this. If I love Succession, I'll probably go back and see what he did before this. If I love, if I love the guys who wrote Game of Thrones, the same people who wrote Lost, then I'm kind of following their work. And just like you sort of follow the work of a director and figure out what the patterns are, what the motifs are, what are the themes they're playing with, what has changed. You have similar sort of intense fan conversations around the works of writers in that sense, right? And I think we're moving towards that culture where that is going to happen for Indian writers as well. The one place where we sort of still need to do more work is that in Hollywood, a lot of the rights of writers are mandated and guaranteed by the contracts, because you have certain sort of
Right.
minimum guarantees which are sort of already established in contracts. In the Indian space, we still don't have a standard writer's contract which sort of mandates certain guarantees. So that's why certain producers can still get away with murder. But the good thing is that Screenwriters Association of India is working towards establishing like a writer's contract, which they're looking to sort of get approval from all the producers. So I'm looking forward to sort of great progress on this as well over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about like my favorite film,
Mm.
because I think prior to this, I probably wasn't also interested or aware of who's writing what. But after Rocky Aur Rani, which personally to me, I just found it so not just refreshing, but relevant. You know, a lot of like the topics, a lot of things that the film spoke about, microaggressions, like just things that and what you inherently are raised with, changing a generation, their viewpoint. There were just so many different themes in that movie. And so where did that idea kind of come? Sorry, as I was saying, I didn't think about like that when I found out that you wrote that, and then I wanted to know actually what else did you write. And then when I looked into it, you've done some amazing work. You wrote Gehraiyaan, you wrote show. I mean, I watched Showtime not that long ago, and I loved it. I actually loved it. And so this is where what you're referring to, like this is where the sea opens up and you're kind of like, okay, I want to know more about this writer and the other, because you look forward to watching something that, like you have written. And I looked forward to that. So I do want to talk about Gehraiyaan in a bit because I have questions. But really, I want to know about Rocky Aur Rani. Like, how did that come to be? What inspired the story? How
Yeah.
does it kind of reflect or break away from like the traditional Bollywood narratives? Tell me everything. Well, start from the beginning.
The story of the creation of Rocky Aur Rani is this, that it was April of 2020, I think. We were about to start shooting Takht, the Mughal drama I did for Karan Johar. And we were like a 1 week away from shooting Takht when the lockdown happened. And then suddenly, it became apparent to us that Takht is not a film that can get made right now because it's like this mega historical piece, which needs just many, many, many people and just everything is larger than life. And we were literally living in a world where we were being told not to be in the same room with any other person, right? In the middle of the pandemic. And then sort of as the pandemic kind of dragged on, it became kind of dark. Became kind of depressing. And of course, filmmaking was the last thing on anyone's life in a sense. Then one day I suddenly get like a call from Karan Johar. And Karan says, look, no film is getting made right now. And I'm sort of feeling the darkness around me as well. I feel like the only productive thing I can do right now is write. And I feel like the kind of film I want to write like right now is like something that takes me back to my happy space, that has like some joy and laughter, because we have enough sort of darkness and depression in the world around us. So basically, Karan told me that he wants to try writing a film with me, which kind of takes him back to his happy space, which is sort of joy and laughter, because anyway, there was enough depression and darkness in the world around us. He said, let's try this. We'll do this in a way where we're just kind of chatting on the phone and we're sort of trying to figure the film out. And he said, I don't know if I'm going to direct this film or someone else will direct it. We'll figure it out. Right now, let's just write and let's just kind of, because that sort of just the process of writing was kind of like was like escapism for us, right? Because it allowed us to kind of, at least while we were writing it, escape like the doom and gloom around us, right? And then we kind of bounced a few ideas around as to what this film could be. Then he suddenly kind of came up with this one story that he remembered about someone in his family who'd kind of lost their memory. And then suddenly, at an old age, their memory came back. And and that person started saying all kinds of scandalous, random things, which kind of caught the family off guard, and they had no idea what was going on. And he said that maybe there's a story there. So we started kind of building around that. And he came up with this idea of what if this is he was very keen to kind of put like a chauvinistic Delhi Punjabi family at the heart of it. So I said, okay, maybe what if this guy has like this grandson who's like the chauvinistic guy and trying to figure out what happened. I thought it would be sort of nice to counter like a chauvinistic Punjabi boy with a feminist Bengali girl. I grew up in Delhi, right? I grew up as a Bengali in Delhi, and I've always told people that I feel like I'm Bengali by birth, but Punjabi by nature, because I've kind of enjoyed both cultures so much. It felt like a great sort of counterpoint to kind of have like a really sharply feminist Bengali heroine as a counterpoint to like this guy. And Karan loved that idea. And I just kind of said like, okay, let me keep trying to push the politics of this as much as I can in terms of making it sharper and sharper and kind of having more fun with it. And that's really where kind of like that was the genesis of Rocky and Rani. Karan had like an immense influence on the writing of this film. A lot, so much of it kind of comes from him, like the idea of the father who does Kathak but is kind of judged for it. He wanted to kind of make a statement about how certain professions are looked at in our society. So much of it is actually all thanks to Karan, comes from his life experience, right? And the fun thing about it was that it just felt like a set of conversations that kind of resulted in a film, right? A lot of people after watching Rocky Aur Rani said that, oh, this is actually Karan Johar making a commentary on his own sort of genre of films, which is the family drama, because he's the king of family dramas in a sense, right? And this is kind of like him kind of doing a subversive take on the family dramas he made like 20 years back. But I think he was just sort of, when we were having our conversations, we were just trying to remain true to what a family drama should feel like if we sort of make it in this day and age. What are the values that it should kind of stand for? And one of the things that I think we were keen to do also was sort of because the nature of families have also kind of changed over the last 20 years. And I think people increasingly recognize that families can liberate us, but families can also kind of entangle us in certain ways, right? And that's kind of like the agony and ecstasy of being part of a family, and that is kind of what you want to kind of explore, right? And I think. It's amazing when sort of Karan is really in his zone and is really going, because he'll go like, yeah, we need this girl who's got like this weight issue, and she's always been judged for that, and her identity has become because of that, and we just kind of kept throwing things into the box till at a certain point of time, I was like, Karan, how long is this film that we're making? Because everyone in this film has an issue, and as soon as you set it up, it will have to be resolved. And he was like, don't worry about it. We're just going to make like this film where we're going to sort of do everything all at once, and somehow it's going to land. And I'm like, you've done this before, so I will defer to your experience. And the amazing thing is that it was like, it's an amazing juggling trick to kind of actually have so many characters, have so many kind of small sort of movements and side plots going with each of them, but to still kind of be able to kind of land them all and make them all feel like they're part of the same film. And I think only Karan could have done it, honestly. I remember when I watched like the first rough cut of this film, I was like, this is such a distinctively Karan Johar film, which I don't think any other sort of director could have made. It almost like when you watch a Almodovar film, in a sense, you feel like, okay, this is an auteur film because only Almodovar could have made it in this way. When I watched Rocky and Rani for the first time, I was like, this is so Karan. This is like, in some way, I don't know what
Yeah.
know him when he made Kabhi Kushi Kabhi Gum or the other films, but when I was watching this, I was like, this is who he is, and he sort of just distilled his sort of empathy, his humor, his sort of larger than life heart, his cheekiness, his sexiness, all into this film. And you know, I frankly, it's he's the magician. We get a lot of credit for it, but I think he should get more.
But it also addressed so many like issues, and I think that's one of the things that was very appealing. And when I did take, I think you said it to me before, like the UN National Assembly to go and watch this film, what was really interesting is how they took to it, like they understood it. They were laughing in the right places and crying in the right places, and it was something that there's this culture that exists in our culture, that exists in so many different cultures. Like so many of my Arab friends, when we talk about certain cultural like nuances, it's like, yeah, but we have that too. And so to actually see, oh my god, there was one point when this lady, she was, when I say she was bawling her eyes out, I'm not even exaggerating. Like she was like this, and then she was leaving the cinema, and we were like, what was it that what resonated with her so much so that triggered her to kind of react that way. And so when we had the debrief after, I was kind of trying to explain to some of my friends, like these, and I love that bit in the movie. And it was like when Ranveer Singh, like when he does the monologue and he says that, I don't know, this is all I was taught. This is what I've been told from the beginning. And how that still exists today, that, we are still carrying kind of these legacies of trauma, instilled from us into us by our, parents. And
Mm,
I mean, I look at it even like my dad, I mean, he's in the other room, so I hope he doesn't hear me. But that generation, like their sense of humor was really derived from at the expense of someone else. And for me, I'm just like, wow, you can't do that. Like, it's not funny. And
mm,
so, how relevant and how well this movie addressed that, like
mm,
showing all the different nuances of even
mm.
though they're really old and, you can't change somebody that thinks that way. Like Jaya Bachchan what's that terminology that Diet Sabia always uses? Jaying. She was completely like jaying in that movie. Have you heard that terminology before?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a great way to kind of explain her. But I was just mind blown. And I love the fact that other people could, away from my culture, could really kind of relate to that.
Yeah.
What were some of like people around you? What were some of their, I mean, I'm really curious to know how the older generation took to that.
The work we create, you never know what's going to become of it, in a sense that sometimes no one gets it, and sometimes you have the most extraordinary sort of outpouring of love and connection with the film, which you kind of can't even imagine. And I think that's what's happened on Rocky or Rani. Like when you told me the story about you taking like this mini version of the United Nations to watch this film and everyone connecting, it felt immensely gratifying and validating. I remember Rocky Rani played at a Taiwan film festival, and this friend of mine who was covering the event said that everyone was bawling there. I was like, we never thought about like a Taiwanese audience when we were sort of making this film, but somehow sort of there is some sort of kernel of truth, some universality of like the human emotion, human experience when it comes to a family that seems to have like struck a chord everywhere. From a personal point of view, I think I belong to a generation where we kind of grew up with a certain kind of humor or a certain kind of looking at the world where, because we were kind of inheriting like our parents' sense of humor, which was often very basic in terms of like you'd make fun of someone because they were fat. It was okay to do that at that point of time, or you'd make fun of someone because they were dark or whatever, right? So when we were sort of growing up, when we were kids, it felt like this kind of humor is okay. It was legitimized. But then as we sort of grew older, we realized, no, that's not okay. These are sort of quite discriminatory and these are problematic. But we were at an age where we could sort of evolve a better understanding of this, and we sort of managed to change. But sometimes when you sort of go to like a family function and you'd have like the generation which is older to you, that still be sort of cracking the same jokes, and that would kind of make you cringe. But at least from a personal point of view, I would sort of say, look, this is not okay. But I still understand why you're cracking these jokes, because you are a function of your conditioning in a sense, right? And I think what happened in the language of cinema is that cinema is also kind of a mirror of culture in some senses. So you had like all these problematic tropes within masala cinema, but as sort of the younger generation became more woke, suddenly all of this disappeared. Suddenly we went from all of this being okay to all of this being not okay. So I think so I felt like we went from very problematic kind of characters to characters who were not problematic at all, who knew like the right thing to say. What I think the charm of Rocky Randhawa is that he's a man in progress, right? He's work in progress. He's not the finished item, right? So he's trying to figure out how this new world works. And he's endearing thing about him is that he's ready to change. He wants to become a better person. He wants to sort of understand the rules how this works for the sake of love. And I think that is what really sort of made Rocky Randhawa connect to so many people. I've had sort of people in their 50s coming to me and say that Rocky Randhawa monologue was the moment when I felt seen. Because it's very easy now to sort of cancel people or put them in compartments, saying that this person is correct and this person is not correct. This is the right way to talk to someone. This is the wrong way to
Yeah.
talk to someone. We're all sort of eager to kind of rush to judgment. We're not ready to sort of sometimes give people the time and the space needed to have the conversation needed to help people understand why something is not appropriate, and we don't necessarily have that kind of patience, right? So I think that monologue is like my absolute favorite bit in the film, because I think that is the more difficult part to land, in a sense, right? If you follow enough folk commentary, you will understand that commenting on people's weight is not correct. Commenting on people's skin color is not correct. But to actually be able to say that, look, you need to give people time to evolve. You need to give people time. You need use, and sometimes sort of people are working on themselves. That is sort of more nuanced argument to make, which cinema in an emotional way can make really well. So that's why that bit is absolutely my favorite bit from the film. And I think because look, these conversations are universal, because in more ways than one, we are like a global culture now. So we have like the same sort of, when sort of someone in America talks about their like boomer dad or boomer parents, we get it as well, because this gender gap is universal. This generation gap is universal. So this conversation about people, older people or people who have been sort of conditioned to sort of think that a certain pattern of behavior is okay, but then learning that it is not okay, and then sort of saying that, okay, look, we did not know any better. That is universal as well, right? Yeah. So I think that is why it's been connecting with everyone all over the world. I had someone from Africa write to me once, talking just like a long DM on Instagram, just talking about how much it affected them. And when I read that, I was like, wow. I mean, someone in Kinshasa is like the last person I thought is going to be like the audience for this film, but there it is.
Yeah. I mean, in contrast, what was Gehraiyaan like for you?
So Gehraiyaan was a really interesting experience. Gehraiyaan had eventually, when it released, had a really, really polarized reaction from the audience, right? There were people who absolutely loved it, and there were a lot of people who absolutely hated it and didn't get it. So much so that eventually I remember that one of the post-release things that happened was that Karan and Shakun Batra, the director of the film, got a panel together to discuss the film with sort of three reviewers who loved the film and three reviewers who hated the film. It was really spirited and exciting conversation.
Yeah.
I think Shakun and so the way it started out was that Shakun and I wanted to kind of work together. We'd been sort of chatting for a while. We're from the same college, so we kind of knew each other. There was this one infidelity story that I'd been developing, because it's always been like infidelity has always been a space which has always excited me as a story, as sort of a canvas for human emotions. So I asked him if he wanted to do it, but he told me he was working on his own infidelity story. So I said, that is interesting that we're sort of kind of hovering around like the same space. And then he asked me if I wanted to just come sit in on his infidelity story and give him some ideas about how he's doing his thing. So I just sort of started sitting with him a couple of times, and together he had like he was in the beginning of the phase where he kind of knew the identities of these four people, but he's sort of still trying to figure out what's going to happen in this plot beyond that. So then we started chatting, and then he invited me to come on and kind of co-write it with him. I think one of the interesting things we did during the making of Gehraiyaan was that we said, let's base this around conversations. Let's make this a film which is kind of observed reality, in the sense that this is the stories, plot points are kind of drawn from people around us, or people whose stories we've had, who've all kind of known to us. Because in a sense, you're trying to tell a story which is very identifiable to at least us and sort of people like us who kind of exist in like a urban reality in a Bombay, in a Delhi, in a Bangalore, right? So I think that's what we were trying to do. And a lot of people have actually come up to me and said that I feel like I am this character, or I'm this character. I'm in a relationship exactly like Deepika was, or Siddhant was, or even Ananya was, or Dharya was, right? So that feels gratifying. And the other thing that happened very early on in the process of the creation of Gehraiyaan was that we decided that it's going to be released on streaming, and it's not going to be a theatrical film. And I think that decision kind of really freed us up, because when sort of you're releasing a film, the business of these two things work differently. When you're releasing like a film theatrically, you're saying, okay, can this really be a niche film, or does it need to kind of appeal to a much wider audience? And sometimes that sort of starts dictating storytelling, that starts dictating how you're going to shoot it, what is the kind of music you want in it. Once we decided it was going to be a streaming film, that just freed us up to say, okay, now we can just go play. We can just go and totally kind of make the film that we want to. Take a lot of chances that we maybe we'd sort of we'd be scared to take because we'd just sort of we'd just be keeping worrying about the box office all the time, and the fear of failure can be crippling a lot of times, right? And that's what happens to a lot of
Mm.
the reason sometimes you get films that are formulaic is because there is so much at stake in a theatrical release that people want to fall back on something that has worked before, right? And that kills your sort of courage to experiment in a way. In the case of Gehraiyaan, we knew like what the way the sort of film pivots in the second half is going to be challenging, is going to be something that kind of throws a lot of people off, right? And it might even divide audiences. But we also knew it was something that we really want to do. So we said we want to do this, and we feel like we have the canvas to go out and take that leap and experiment, which maybe like a theatrical film might not have, and then we'll see how it lands. And I think it's very important to kind of take chances and be fearless when you're a creative person. I was very glad that we were able to do that. And I'm very proud of that film. And sometimes I remember I was in Kerala at some hotel, I was staying there, and somehow they found out that I work in films, and they kind of the staff went and looked up my filmography, and then someone came to me and wanted my autograph. So I said, "Oh yeah, you figured that I've written Rocky Aur Rani." He said, "No, it's because you wrote Gehraiyaan." And Gehraiyaan is a film that I felt like is my film. It's my story. It is like, I think the fan base of Gehraiyaan is, and I think it's probably a smaller fan base than Rocky or Rani, but they have such an intense connection and such an intense relationship with the film that they just want to. That guy just then wanted to kind of chat with me for like why did you think of this, and he wanted to tell me how he felt when he was watching that film, and how it really kind of got under his skin. So this is what you sort of make films for, in a sense. This kind of connection where sort of people just really
I
feel
loved it.
compelled to kind of talk to you and tell you how it kind of really made them feel.
Yeah, I loved Gehraiyaan. It resonated with me. There were a lot of emotions that I could relate to. I think and I know some people who didn't like it. People were like, but I think there was, again, the ending. It was just the ending. And sometimes I think like when the ending is so open-ended and so ambiguous, and it's kind of left to the audience to kind of decide what their interpretation of it is, I think that's where the confusion begins, or that's when people are like, well, I don't like it. It's not that they don't like the film. They just, some people just need like a happy end or a sad end, or they just need a final. And I think with Gehraiyaan, and I'm curious to know in your, like, from your point of view, like, what was the ending? Why was it left so open-ended?
I mean, it was left so open-ended because exactly, so that I don't have to answer this question, that because we wanted you to make up your own mind. Because see, the thing that we were very clear about in this film is that usually whenever there is an infidelity story in Indian cinema, there is a huge kind of moral judgment that kind of comes with it. Especially so if if the protagonist is a woman, right? And we said that, look, we don't want this is not a, we don't want to make this a moral story. We don't want moral judgment, but we want to invite people in to ask, what do you make of it? How do you think about this, right? And again, this is one of those things which is, that kind of ending was possible because it was a streaming film. I think if it had been a theatrical film, maybe there would have been pressure to say like, okay, no, you need to tell me, how do you want audiences to leave this? Do you want because do you want to make them feel happy? Do you want to make them feel sad? Don't leave them confused. Tell them what happened in the end, right? But what I love about the end, and again, we did it because Shakun, I discussed it, and we said, this is exciting. This is creatively exciting to us to kind of lob the ball back in the audience's court and say, okay, now you've seen the story. Now you tell us what you think happens next, and maybe like three of you watch it, and three of you kind of go away with three different interpretations of this. And that is kind of part of the joy of watching this film, the conversation that will happen afterwards. And I think from what I know of people who've really loved it, they've also got to spend many, many days analyzing it, talking about it, and having conversations around it, which I absolutely love, because I feel like Uh, I feel like it's making an entertaining film that makes you laugh or cry is of course rewarding. But if I can make a film that really makes it that you can't stop talking about for a week or whatever time, right? Then that in a sense that's an even bigger high for me. Even when sort of so even when like this whole and there was like this huge sort of media furor around the release of Gehraiyaan. Whether you loved it, whether you hated it, people just couldn't sort of stop talking about it, right? It was necessary to have an
Talking
opinion,
about
and
it. Yeah.
everyone was talking simultaneously about it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I don't mind that some people don't like it. I love the fact that people can't stop talking about it, and it has become such an important kind
Yeah.
of part of culture that you need to have an opinion about it because this is the purpose of art in a sense, to make you talk, make you question, make you think about what you just saw. And I took that as a win, and I took that as a great accomplishment for the film in that sense.
Definitely. I loved it. I thought it was a great film. So, just conscious of the time, I just have two last questions. In your words, very quickly, what advice do you have for aspiring writers? So, for those kind of like looking to enter the industry, those who are struggling in the industry, what advice would you give to aspiring writers about navigating the challenges and making their voices heard?
One is grow really thick skin, because rejection is part and parcel of the business. So just know that you will hear more no's than yes, but don't let that destroy you or your work. Instead, use that to kind of build better, build stronger. The second thing is try to find your tribe as fast as you can, because I think eventually there is no right way to make a film. There are hundreds and hundreds of different ways to make a film, and none of them is right, none of them is wrong. What is important is that you find people who vibe with your voice, with your aesthetic, with what you're trying to do. So try to identify the people. So follow the work of the people sort of you look up to. Try to get into their orbit. Try to get into their team. Try to pitch your work to people whose work you really admire, because there's a greater chance that there might be some sort of synergy there. Really, find a way to make money which is not dependent on writing. Because at least for the early stage in your career, if you're going to be a full-time writer, finances might be a struggle. You need to sort that out. If you have a day job, don't quit the day job till you have some solidity. If you have some other, like I have an assistant right now who's very good at doing the stock market thing and doing crypto. And I said, this is the most important thing that will help you become a writer. Because if you've got your
Yeah.
finances sorted out for like 2-3 years, then you can last,
Yeah.
then you can last whatever the kind of industry throws at you. It always takes longer for it to happen than
Yeah.
than you think it will. If you think it will take you 1 year, it will take you three. So be prepared for that, and remember that eventually, if you last long enough, then you have a greater chance for success. So that's what you need to do. Longevity is more important than talent in some senses.
Makes sense. Okay, very lastly, I ask all my guests. Obviously, the podcast is called What's Brown Got to Do with It? So I ask all the guests, what does Brown have to do with it for you? So, in the realm of like filmmaking, script writing, what does being Brown mean to you? What does it have to do with you, for you?
Yeah. So I think this connects back to what we were talking about earlier about how a film like Rocky or Rani can have such a resonance with global audiences everywhere, right? We come from a culture where we have grown up watching Hollywood films, right? And we've grown up connecting to Hollywood films, right? But the opposite has not necessarily been true. But I think now we are sort of increasingly moving towards a multipolar world where there isn't necessarily one center of world power economically or culturally, right? Where because of like, let's say Netflix, you can watch a show from South Korea, which can be the biggest show in the world, or a show from Spain, right? And I think the moment has come for Indian content also to sort of cross over in the same way. We sort of saw with Hira Mandi how that has gone on to become like a big global success. So I think this is an amazing time for brown people to kind of just shoot their shot in a certain way, And I think the audience is no longer just your audience in India or in Pakistan or the subcontinent. Your audience is the world. You just need to have a story that the world wants to listen to. That's what happened with RRR. There were so many
Yeah.
white people excited about RRR that it suddenly became like an Oscar contender. And this was unimaginable like 10 years back. But now that is possible
Mm.
and more is possible. I think we are looking at a world where you're going to have like big franchises that the whole world wants to watch coming out of India, coming out of Pakistan, coming out of the subcontinent. I think this is a really exciting time to be a brown creator.
I love that. Well, thank you, Sumit. This is so much more I could have like spoken to you about and spoke to you about in great length. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been really insightful and good luck. I'd love to hear more about all the great things you're working on. And maybe we'll save that for another conversation. But thank you for joining today.
Yeah, lovely. And I'd love to come back and answer more questions when the next release comes out.
Definitely.